We are very lucky to have Phil Dexter with us, who is with the British Council as a Global Teacher Development Advisor. He specialises in primary and secondary education, and particularly learners with special needs and ways to reach them educationally, which is why the title is Reaching the Sometimes Unreachable, the unreachable referring to those with special needs. He promises a very interesting session today, including lots of interaction and kind of being involved. So if you can be as close to the front as possible, that will allow you to get involved in these interesting activities. Don't be scared, we're very nice people. And I guess without further ado, it's over to Phil.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, just to add to what's been said, what I'd like to do in this session is revisit some of the issues that came up on Saturday in the panel discussion. But it's also, there was a very strong request in that meeting for teacher intervention. And that's exactly what we're going to do as well. So there's going to be quite a few practical activities as well. Okay? So as long as you realise this is going to happen. Okay? So it is kind of involvement as well, which of course is a very strong message anyway in reaching all our learners. I think somebody's taking time. Oh, mobile phone. Yes, right. Yes. Let's try. I mean, I'm quite happy lessons being linked with the outside world, but perhaps maybe we have mobiles on silent. All right. I'm also going to do quite a bit of moving around. Some of it will be a bit of a talk and some moving around, but I also feel it's quite useful as a teacher to move around because it's kind of harder to hit a kind of moving target. Have you all picked up a copy of this?
Yes.
Everyone got one? Nobody not got one? Yeah. Okay. Well, don't come in. That's fine. There are plenty more on the British Council stand. But I may actually refer to one or two of the activities here. But it's free. You've got it on your memory stick, and you can get a hard copy from here on the stand as well. Okay. This talk today is called "Reaching the Sometimes Unreachable." My strong view is that certainly, if we're talking about mainstream classrooms, almost no learner is unreachable, if we reach them in the right way. And really, this is, if you want the punchline for this session, that's what it is. Okay. Now, at the back, you may not be able to read this, which is another example for coming to a bit closer. This is an everyday classroom in anywhere in the world: India, Britain, Sri Lanka, Africa, South America. Okay, and this is the reality that teachers are faced with their learners. Okay, with learners eating things, chewing gum, poking people in the head, sleeping, coming in late, etc. Sticking out their foot so somebody will fall over, okay, etc. So, and in all this group, this multi-level group, this mixed ability group, which is the reality, whether it's a big class or a small class, this is the reality. I've been normal, okay? So that's what you're faced with. That's the reality. Now, on top of that, we then have issues like special educational needs, which is another layer to the... Just take a seat, okay? Now, that's a range of needs. Something that I want to say is that I think it's very, very important to try and understand our learners, understand our learners' needs. And in a sense, all learners are special. But I do feel very strongly that it's important not to really box people in and label them, because often what the needs are is not always clear. And we've talked about this on the panel discussion about hidden needs, and we'll come on to that in a minute. So understand where an issue, a problem, and a behaviour might come from, or a learning challenge, but I'm very sceptical about trying to box people in, because often there are multiple needs anyway. And say your average child has got all sorts of that. We all have. I like to call it, to say, is it a question of difficulties or is it a question of differences? We talked in the panel discussion about thinking positively, and I think a lot of this is to do with differences, which don't fit that easily with locked-in curricula syllabi. Okay, and I call it kind of encouraging the learning flow. In a sense, all the fish will probably have different colours actually, and are flowing all over the place. But if there's one or two, they're not a problem. They're actually a gift for the class, in my view. Okay, just for those of you who like facts and figures, I'm going to give you a few facts and figures. This is from the UK. We can discuss the actual numbers and percentages if you want. I think the important point is it's a lot of people. It's a lot of learners. So it's a large part of your class, in whatever, probably a large part of this group as well. Some interesting figures from the UK. This is from UNESCO, but it's about the UK. And that's how different countries actually, the kind of numbers and ratio that they kind of recognise in terms of special educational needs, which doesn't even tell us the ones that they don't recognise. It's the ones that they recognise. And even if you look at the UK, I've got in bold, it's very different pattern across the UK between England and Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. If England and Wales is 2.1 to 4% and Scotland 6.1 to 10%, it doesn't necessarily mean there's an epidemic in Scotland. It might. I'm Scottish, I can say that. But it just means that obviously the education authorities and schools have a broader concept of what goes into those special needs, which is interesting. A lot of it in the UK, of course, the way these numbers are calculated, unsurprisingly, are to do with resourcing and the amount of resources that local authorities and schools have, and they like to keep the numbers down, so they don't have to spend so much money. Which is why everyone says that the Scots are mean. Well, the very opposite. Yes, they're very generous, the Scots. We've got a generous view of special educational needs. Okay, that's just those are the facts and figures. What's going on here? Okay. I showed this the other day, so I'm not going to label this, but very, very important, understanding the concept of recognised needs and the hidden needs, and that is, Farida actually mentioned 80% of the class, so sounds a big figure, but again, the most important point is, whatever the figure is, it's a large part of the class, of the school. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the majority of learners. Every learner is special, as I said. Every special need needs to be addressed as best we can, no matter the nature of that need. But my real interest and real focus is on this majority of learners who appear to be the failures, or appear to not achieve at the extent that they could achieve if they had the right support. And that I feel is the mass of learners that we as teachers. And just to say again, this is not about specialists in special educational needs. This is about what all teachers can do, with a bit of understanding, a bit of flexibility, and a bit of kind of creativity, where we can do lots. Okay, I talked before about this social medical model, but just in the panel discussion, but just to say, very, very important, this different concept, that it takes it away from seeing it as the individual as a problem. They are a problem in the class. I can't do what I want to do because of them. And that the impairment is the problem, but rather they were somewhere else. Well, the social model actually starts from a person-child-centered approach, and that it's society and the structures of society that has to adapt for the individuals. And that's what we mean about reaching learners the way they learn. we're not going to take questions during the session, but if you've got questions, and I think this is a very important point that you might want to ask something about or contribute something about. And I think promotion of the social model is very, very important. And fundamentally, it's about everyone's democratic access to education, to curriculum. That's a fundamental principle. And so the focus really is much more not on, well, what can I get that little boy to do who's visually impaired in the class, but how can everyone meet the learning outcomes in the way that they can. Okay, and there we are. Albert Einstein was dyslexic, a failure at school. Okay, and yes, experience is the fundamental. Okay, I used this phrase in the panel discussion about neurodiversity, and I think that is a good way of expressing things, because again, it's not clear where the root of the challenge is. And so again, getting away from that's the dyslexic learner, that's the autistic, Asperger's learner, that's the ADHD, that's the visual impaired. I think we need to look at it in a much more holistic approach, really. And I think our interventions need to be much more holistic. I think for practical reasons, this is actually very, very important, because how do you have 28 different lessons in the same classroom? And I think what I want to show you can do one particular intervention, but reach a range of learners. What I've put here about flight into the curriculum, what actually happens in practice is that, in a sense, learners know their strength more than anyone else does. And so people choose professions, choose areas to be involved in that suit their style. A lot of dyslexics actually go into architecture or art, and which have a much more visual approach. And so they kind of choose their own pathways as well, which is quite interesting, I think, as well. As I say, I think it's very much about how brains work in a different way. Okay, I want to give you a little personal story, because I think this is really important, because if you're going to work with learners with special educational needs, I think a large part of this is understanding and it's empathy. And I think you yourself need to think about perhaps maybe some of your own challenges that you've had in learning in order to help others. And I think this is actually very, very important. It could be a small thing, or it could be a bigger thing. But I think if you really understand what you have done, I think you're in a much better position both to understand and to support. So, when I was at school, you probably hear I still do have a bit of a speech impediment and a stammer. But at school, it was a big problem. In the big world of special educational needs, you might not think this is such a special need, but it was for me, when I was at school. I don't know if you've seen the King's Speech, do you know the film?
Yes,
so
yes.
You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So I have quite a lot of these chapters. I just want to go through a few things, and that teachers, school professionals' response to me that with the best will in the world was not so good. So stammering, obviously, and anxiety is with that. Something it's sometimes called kind of selective mutism, which means sometimes using language, sometimes closing down, basically. Things like beginning of the school term or the school year, whole class, teacher with a register, people call out their names, horrible, horrible. And of course the effect that would have with others in the class, obviously. Young people, teenagers would laugh at people for the stammer, which just makes it worse. Certain sounds that were just impossible to say in certain contexts. But even more important than that was unhelpful help by teachers with the best will in the world. And you know, nothing worse for somebody with a speech impediment than somebody finishing their sentences, you know, with the best intention, but almost always the worst thing you could possibly do, because it can only make it worse. Inconsistent approaches as well, which is also, you know, the worst thing that teachers can do. Most of the time, teachers would not ask me questions, you know, but sometimes they would, and I wouldn't know when. And so they thought they were helping me, but at the same time, I had to be involved in some way. And it's just a bit of common sense, really. But, what I call misunderstandings, because I couldn't verbalise very often in the whole class, you know, get up here and stand and ask a question myself. I did have to talk to a friend of mine next to him, or a classmate. And I was actually talking about the lesson. That was my need to verbalise. But teachers will often interpret that as me being naughty and talking in class. You know, so again, it's just kind of misunderstanding. I did get some school and professional support, but it was basically useless for me. You know? And I have this vague recollection of going to a speech therapist and kind of doing something with a sandpit. And I know now it's to do with kind of making kind of visual clues in terms of language and things like that. But it did nothing for me. You know? And I hope speech therapy support is much better today, but for me it wasn't. You know? On the other hand, you know, if I was at school now, with the advantage of technology, you know, emailing, texting, Twitter, you know, PowerPoint presentations, absolutely perfect for me, and also confidence booster as well. Now, my problem could have been associated with dyspraxia. You know, and there are other factors that I won't necessarily go into that maybe say that I may have had a challenge with dyspraxia. But I wouldn't like to say that, you know, things like kind of motor coordination skills and things like that, yeah? And I wouldn't like to say that it's an obvious one-to-one connection. You know, so I could have been diagnosed as, well, there's Phil, the dyspraxia person, but it could have been a complete misdiagnosis. Yeah? So maybe it's other kinds of intervention that's necessary. Okay, that's me. You know, as you see, I can speak to big crowds. I can speak to 1,200 and however many it was on Saturday. It's not so much about me. It's about understanding the issues and how we can support people in kind of overcoming those challenges. Okay, I think a lot of it's to do with, you all know about multiple intelligences, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence by going into this. It's about different styles, it's about different ways that the brain works and the strengths that we have. Again, often MI, multiple challenges, is misunderstood, saying, well, let's divide up the class into the different intelligences. Yeah. There's the kinesthetic, there's the interpersonal, there's the intrapersonal. And you know, perhaps those who are interpersonal like to do more kind of individual activities, and interpersonal might be better in group work, etc. However, what really matters is we all have all of these, and it's the interconnection of all of these. You know, so it's multivarious. So again, it's about bringing people all together, really, as those various intelligences, not dividing into and isolating into intelligences. Okay, just a little bit on dyslexia and maybe a little bit on autism before we do some practical stuff. All of a sudden, I've gone to green. Why have I gone to green? Anyone any idea? Sorry? Well, it's not colour blindness, no.
Reading.
Can you say that a bit louder? Facilitates, I've got the microphone. Facilitates the reading of dyslexic people, yeah. The worst possible background for anyone with dyslexic challenges is white. So if you want a little strategy straight away, that's something to think about. And our world is full of whiteboards and
like notebooks.
Yes. Many in the UK, I'm sure elsewhere, many people who are dyslexic, they go around with a little green transparency or a pink transparency or an orange transparency to go over the white background. Because it actually supports. You know, some can have lenses now. You can get actually prescription lenses, which are tinted in a way, which is actually very useful. So my dyslexic one then slides out green. None of these challenges are necessarily related, and usually not related to intelligence. It's nothing to do with it, although it may seem it. Okay, and it's about strengths and weaknesses. Okay, and it definitely affects girls as much as boys, even though that's sometimes not thought to be the case. These PowerPoints are all going to be available, aren't they? I think, yeah, so you have all this. Yeah. Dyslexia, obviously, it expresses itself in reading problems, reading challenges, and letters jumping and confusing, reversing, etc., etc. And one other thing I did say also, real nightmare for me with my speech impediment was reading aloud. And we haven't got time to go into the methodology of whether reading aloud in any context is a useful activity, but I certainly question it. It can have its purposes, but certainly somebody like me and other people with other kinds of reading challenges, it's an awful thing to do, and can only bring an anxiousness unless, and this is the important bit, a lot of this also is about the learner's choice. If the learner wants to do it and likes to do it, then I think that's a very positive thing. Okay, and a large part of it as well is about following multiple instructions is a real challenge. So we have to do things to break down the lessons. Okay, and a lot of it is to do with, and Farida talked a lot about this in her session as well, about the relationship between working memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. And very much about sequencing. And issues of grammar and time and tense is a real challenge. Okay, I just want to try a little activity with you. What I'd like you to do is that I'd like you to write this out into quote-unquote English in your notepad. However, before you start, if you're right-handed, you need to do it with your left hand. And if you're left-handed, you do it with your right hand. Just kind of transcribe that into English. Yeah? Just write that down. I'll probably stop you before you finish. Make sure you use the right hand, I mean the correct hand, or the wrong hand. Okay, I'm going to stop you. I know you haven't completed that. And again, don't want to insult your intelligence. This is the answer. It's not about the answer. What I am very interested in is how you felt about doing it. What was going through your mind as you were doing it?
It's difficult.
And why was it difficult?
Something we're not used to.
We are not used to that.
We are not used to write with the left.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Writing every alphabet also was different.
Okay, and that's a bit of a challenge, yeah. And that's,
the way we struck our T's
sure,
and wrote the P's and things like that.
Oh, you mean the English is different?
No, with the other hand.
Yeah.
It was difficult.
Yeah.
We are usually to write either with the right hand or with the left hand.
Yeah.
And silent.
Yeah.
But is it possible from the beginning of the maybe from the
Practice it is possible. That's correct.
we start writing with the left hand or with the right hand?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It is. Yeah. But anyway, this activity is just to give you a little insight into how somebody with writing challenges will feel. Yeah. So So, and I think it's important to understand that. Yeah. dysgraphia and dyslexia. Yeah. Yeah, let's not go into that now. And again, and I think the important issue is that we're trying not to label as well, but we're kind of thinking in a more kind of holistic approach to the challenges. But we can talk about that later. Okay. When somebody asked me at the panel discussion about an actual teacher intervention, I mentioned this jigsaw. As English teachers, we love doing reading and listening activities that are jigsaws where the text is all jumbled up and you put it together. As I say, for a dyslexic learner and some others, this issue of sequencing will be a major challenge, and it's an impossible thing to do. And so the problem isn't their linguistic skills; it's just that it cannot be done. So you might like to do different things. I mean, I remember in teaching, I was always a bit concerned when I did jigsaws, because if I cut up the scissors, with actual scissors, and you cut up the text, and then you see that the text just becomes a jigsaw, and you can actually do the jigsaw without knowing any of the language. And I thought, oh no, we have to avoid that, so we have to mix it up. But actually, for some learners, that actually would be a very good thing to do, as long as they have an understanding and an overview of what the language task is. Actually, just using the frame and the outline, why not? Because what matters is that they complete the task. The aim is to complete the task, not to challenge whether they can do the jigsaw. So just with one activity, you can do something else to make it very doable and achievable, which is what this is all about. It's getting our learners to achieve in the way they can. Okay, and many learners, the real issue is that they have a holistic approach to learning. And so that's the way they have to learn. So instead of a jigsaw text, a dyslexic learner might use a mind map, which is the way of ordering. And on the right-hand side, as you look at it, these are the kind of language processing challenges, which are things we can do something about as teachers. Okay, right. I'm going to skip this for time, actually, but we can come back to that. Okay, go on to a few strategies, but then we're going to go straight into some practical things. Okay? A large part is, and what Mary was saying about thinking positively, there are very thinking positively things you could do easily, and that is giving credit for success, not marking what is wrong, but marking what is right, and giving encouragement. Very much, it's about, as I say, very difficult challenges in multitasking and multiple instructions. So ensuring that it's success one at a time. It's a bit like climbing a mountain. You go to if you're going to go to the Himalayas, some people will go up the ice, the kind of the really challenging side of the mountains, but others used to go to base camp and then just go up the foothills. So it's about, and success breeds success as well. So once you see, well, I've come that far, I can do a bit more now. Okay. I might be out of breath, but I've got some more energy. Very much also about learner choice. I mean, I actually see this. I've done a lot of work in my life and in English language teaching on encouraging learner independence and autonomy and establishing self-access centres and all these kind of things. And this, to me, is the ultimate and the logical extension of kind of learner choice. Both in terms of how we relate to the learners and what the learners do. I've said reading aloud. And here's just some other list. Maybe you can just read that for half a minute. And as I say, these PowerPoints will be available to everybody. Okay. Sorry? Oh, anyone else?
Keep it simple and short.
Keep it short
Short
and
and
simple.
simple.
Some people say keep it short, keep it short, stupid, but I don't say. So it doesn't mean keep everything simple. It means keep it as simple as it needs to be. Ensure it's achievable, it's doable. That's what we need. It can be very challenging as well. And we do want to challenge our learners, at all levels. Okay, let me do something a bit practical now. I've drawn something on both of those flip charts. And as you can see, nobody in this room can draw worse than I can. We've got something there. I'd like a few volunteers, actually. And I'd like them to come and add something to my drawings, which become our drawings, okay? And we can put them on both flip charts, okay? Just one thing, okay? And no words. Yeah. No. Your choice. Learner choice. Okay. Either. Anyone else? We're not looking for artists. I mean, there will be artists, but anyone else? Oh. You just can't get the materials these days. Anyone else? Anyone else? Once you get started, you just can't stop, people. Oh, what did I say? Yeah. There's always one in the class who wants to be the artist. Yeah. Okay, and we could do more, but we won't. What I'd like you to do, just for about 30 seconds, if you talk to the person next to you or 2 or 3 people around you, just, we've done the drawing bit, now we're thinking of it with our teachers' heads and hats. How could we use this in the language class? Yeah. So if you just stop for 30 seconds. How could we use these in the language class? Sorry? Well, you probably think of many different ways. That might be one. What's happening? You want to say something, all right? What? So, how do you use that drawing? Yeah. And. Yeah, well, let's feed back to the whole group. Yes, actually. So, if somebody wants to say that, what we're going to use that. Okay. Now, in a group this size, I'm expecting 300,000 possible different ways. But would anyone like to offer some suggestions? Well, I'm looking for actual.
I'd go for compare and contrast the two.
Ah, yeah, nice one. Yeah. Compare and contrast the two. Yeah.
Another thing is using composition in which prepositions are used
Okay.
for description in front of, behind. So writing them, teaching them how to write using prepositions.
Okay. Quite high level, but yeah.
At the level of judgment or critical analysis, is the diagram good or bad?
That's kind of artistic judgment, but I suppose if you're using language to explain the artistic judgment, then we've got some more over here.
Sir, we thought maybe storytelling.
Yeah.
Storytelling.
Yeah.
Action sequence, direction.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And you could be doing this at lots of different levels as well. Yeah.
So, I'm sure it's going to come up. Ma'am?
Right. Yeah. Yes. Okay. I think there's tons of people over here.
We can use it to do some predictions.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the composition, we can also ask the students what are they doing and what are their feelings.
Okay. You've gone in the main for quite high level activities.
Yeah.
Very basic. Just naming the vocabulary, prepositions.
Yeah.
You know, putting a sentence together or a phrase together as well. But of course, and so this is multi-level. You can do this. You could give, quite simply give quite a lot of different tasks for different people, and you're going to get different outcomes as well. This is your course. This is your syllabus. This is your course book. Could be.
Yeah.
Anything you can do with your course book, you can do with this.
Yeah.
Because the moment you ask the question, when did it happen, you've got any tense.
Yeah.
Okay, is it now? Is it last week? Is it yesterday? Is it next week? Is it next year? Okay, so any element of grammar, and it could be very simple grammar, or it could be more complex grammar. And same with vocabulary. You might do something like let's assume this is a house. Who knows? You might want to say, well, what rooms are there? Or you might want to label door or something, or window. But then you might want to go into the house, and we can't see the vocabulary, but you could dig out more and more vocabulary. So again, some of the class will know some, others will know more, and you're actually, as a whole class, you can build up a whole bunch of vocabulary, and then you decide what you want to do with vocabulary.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just one activity which you could do with any course book, any textbook of any sort you want to use. This was a bit random, but you might want to focus it. You might want to structure the drawing a little bit if that's your choice, so that it links with what you're actually teaching at that point. Yeah? What was the learner's role in this? Yours.
Participation and creativity.
Okay.
Imagination.
Exactly. It started with my drawing, ended up with yours. And you have drawn things that you wanted to draw. Maybe at a low level you might not have known some of the words that for what you've drawn, and so you're learning that, you want to know that. But it's yours. It began with my visual text, and it's become your text, and then we do things with it. Well, I am taking a kind of holistic approach. Okay, so my focus here really is really well. I'm trying to do two things. I think it's an activity for everyone in the class, and it's actually something. I mean, I've done this thousands and thousands of times with learners, teachers, and even military people and learning English, and everyone gets into it, but I'm actually trying to target and address those learners who will access the language through a kind of visual approach. That's what I'm doing. Does that answer your question? Yes, sure. But again, it's when you talk about completion, I think it's also very important that people and seeing people themselves seeing achievement, which is not always full completion as well. You know that they've actually been able to engage with the activity, and it becomes that there are kind of learning outcomes without fully having completed in the way that some others might as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to something else. Has everyone, well, these are just some, I mean, you've come up with many more ideas, but these are just some ideas. Mary Delaney mentioned doing a task inside a structure, and that's what concrete writing is, if you're not sure what that is. It's actually from, we could use that, and maybe they write a little story, but they actually draw a little frame, and then they write inside the frame. Now, for some learners, it could be said, perhaps, and I'm only saying perhaps, with ADHD challenges, who need a structure and a product outcome, that could be a useful activity, and it's because it's encased, and they're just writing within that. That's just one example. Okay, has everyone got your notebook and a pen? Okay.
Yeah.
As we say in the class, could you take a new piece of paper, please? Or start on a new page. I'm going to play you some music. Okay? It's going to be 5 little short pieces of music. Okay? And as you listen to the music, just draw whatever comes into your head. Okay? It's 5 pieces of music, but 1 drawing. We all know about teachers' instructions. You could have the greatest activity in the world, but if your instructions aren't clear, then the activity becomes a mess. And you don't meet your learning outcomes. 5 pieces of music, very short, but 1 drawing. Okay, just continue. Again, it's not about finding an artist. You may or may not be an artist. But so the more abstract, the better, actually. Okay. Actually, I'm just going to make it 3 pieces of music because of time. Now, maybe just finish off your masterpieces before I do that. What I'd like you to think about is, once again, how you could use this in the classroom. Okay, could you just think about it or talk to somebody for 30 seconds? How you might use this? Okay, we haven't got a lot of time, so let's... anyone like to say something?
For the first music, actually, I had the Titanic in mind. And sort of when the second music came on, I had a few helicopters around and a few rescue boats around. And the third one, sadly, we have a fire where, poor thing, had no chance at all. And you've got the ambulance for those that might still survive.
Okay. Not sure about the linguistic tasks, but anyone else? Yep. Is there a microphone coming your way?
The response to the song, how did you like it? Can you guess the song?
Okay.
Yes, in a classroom, we would use the picture to depict different stories and narrations looking at the picture. What you feel by looking at the picture, and we can get different interpretations.
Yes. Thank you. Just take one more.
Yes, I drew a boat on some waves with a lonely boatman there for the first set of music you played. And for the second one, I thought there would be children doing some skipping, dancing or exercising in the open. And the third one I thought was perfect for a new dawn.
Okay. It may have been my bad instructions, bad teacher, but the idea is that it's one holistic drawing, even though it's different pieces of music. But as ever, if a learner interprets something a different way and is doing a task, then what's the problem? There's some learning going on there. Okay, one more.
Holistic. Actually, what I have drawn, all the three pictures, they depict happiness.
Right.
So we could nature and also dance with musical instruments. So we could find, the three of us, some kind of a connection, the new sprouting of new life, happiness, dance. That's what we find.
Thank you very much. Yes. Let me just say a few ways. I'm sorry, we will have to move on, but thank you. One way I've often used this, but there's lots of alternatives, is because the idea in my head, it's taking a multi-sensory approach, and it's going from music to visual to then text. And what it does, after you've done your drawing, I would then ask to write a very short story. Now there are alternatives to this, but to write a very short story, 20 words or something, or 15 or 10. And then you swap your drawing with somebody else, and you write a story based on their drawing, and then share the drawing, and then perhaps talk about what's similar and what's different between your drawings. And of course, you're going to get a whole range of emotions and feelings through that as well. But of course, there are all sorts of different ways to address everyone's needs. Perhaps many people are actually blocked when they try and do the drawing. Well, most people, most do it eventually. But maybe there are lots of alternatives. Maybe instead of asking them to draw, they might just write down some words that express their feelings and emotions while they're doing it, or words they can think of. Maybe some can't even do that. You just ask them to think about the emotions. So So you could form groups of all sorts of different learners who are actually one single task from the teacher, but the learners are doing lots of different tasks and are actually doing things that they can do and want to do. So that's just an example. But it is about coming to the text later, whether it's an oral text or a written text, so and through music and art and drawing to then the linguistic text. Okay, a few other things, just if you want to really teach grammar, or give an explanation of some grammar points. But you do want to try and do this in a more visual way. This is just some examples that you might, that might help to explain it in a visual way. Okay. I want to do what I want to do. This is not going to be easy, but I want to do it. This last activity, because it's a nice one. But I'm not sure how we're going to do it with this many people. I'm going to need some. I'm going to need some volunteers. I'm going to need about 3 or 4 people to come over here, either with chairs or with chairs. Okay. I want some people to come here because I think most people can probably see what's happening here. Yeah. Could I have about 4 or 5 people to come to the front? Yep. Okay. Well, we're going to use this bit of space here. Okay. And people at the back, you can, but you need to make sure that people can see what's happening here. Actually, I've got a better idea. Let's do it here. Okay? We don't need, just move this slightly. Okay, now, what I want you to do is choose one of those, okay? You're going to design a holiday camp or a sports centre or your ideal school, okay? But you're not going to talk about it, well, you are going to talk about it, but you're not going to write it. You're actually going to design it using buttons. And what I've got is some Cuisenaire rods as well. Okay, so in your group, and if you just all watch what's happening, okay, and maybe how they're discussing together as well, just using lots of buttons, okay? You've got everything you want in here, and you can take more. Okay. So if you could quickly decide which one you're going to do, because we've only got a few minutes. Okay. You can use these. Probably talk another 5 minutes and then. And if you want some marbles, there they are. Maybe kind of think about how they're discussing together. I don't know how much. Maybe you can listen if you. Oh, of course you can see it there. Technology is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
The classroom that we are trying to draw with the buttons and these things over here. We have an interactive classroom here.
Yeah, so it's an interactive classroom with a U-shaped class, and the students are sitting in a semicircle fashion? Yes. Okay. Oh, in the mixed group?
Yes,
oh, sorry.
The teacher,
okay, where's the blackboard?
The teacher would be roaming around the class.
Okay. So are there multiple teachers or one teacher?
See what the students are. To show the movement of teachers and the
Yeah.
Okay, and where are the audio visual aids then? No, but it's ideal classroom, right?
Without audio-visual aids, ideal classroom could be used.
Oh, that's nice.
Okay, keep some stationary items here. For each group there should be these, right?
In a large group.
Okay, and what kind of stationery we should have in the classroom?
I believe.
He's bothered about the station.
Okay, so that means there is only one teacher, but we're roaming around. This is your board, right?
Okay.
Oh, these are the
Okay.
boards.
Well, let's stop now, and you can explain to everybody. Okay. Okay. So they're just going to explain what they've done. Okay.
If they can move, we'll be able to see it on
Okay,
the
this
screen.
is an interactive classroom where there is group work going on. These are one teacher moving around. The movement is being shown by 3 different figures that to show that the teacher is moving around among the groups. And different colored buttons show that the students these are all heterogeneous groups.
The camera can be pointed there.
All,
On the table, the camera can be pointed on the table.
similar, and there is one group leader here in each of the groups who is leading the activity, and this is the blackboard or the activity board on which the board is activity instructions are given. This is all we could do, and there are some books on the shelf in the
Apart from the books, there is some extra activities.
Moving teacher is in okay. So this is it. We couldn't finish anymore.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Okay. Now, quite a few things here. Now you can imagine that was just one group doing it. If all the class is doing it, you're going to get lots of different designs and lots of different. You get a massive amount of language out of no text other than a tactile and visual text. And you can do it with any kinds of bits of wood or Lego or something. Buttons are everywhere. Yeah. So, what often happens here, and again, it's going from visual tactile to then in this case it would be some spoken language that you would practice. And so you can do this with almost zero language, actually. And what also happens in most groups when you're doing this, especially where the learners share the same first language, is they actually talk about the task in their first language, but they actually report back in target language, in foreign language. And I think this is a brilliant kind of and positive way of using multiple or both or multiple languages in the classroom. And obviously we want the target language to be used as much as possible. And I think this is one way that actually helps that process. It doesn't hinder it. Yeah? Because learners have to kind of think about the ideas and work on the assumption that you can actually think at least as good in your first language as you can in the target language. And I think it's very, very important. Okay, I'm going to have to stop in a minute, and then we can have some questions. So I just want to finish with 2 little slides. Okay. And just before I do that, by the way, did you enjoy doing this activity? Those who did it?
Yes.
Yeah. What did you enjoy about it? What was it?
Group work.
Group work? Yeah. Working together, collaborating.
Involvement.
Yeah. And you were doing it in ways that you can do it as well. You were achieving in the ways you can. Okay. This will be on. This is just some examples, and will be on your PowerPoint that you get. 2 things I want to just say. This is from neuro-linguistic programming, if you know about that. A little phrase. If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got. Okay? So, if what you do is working well and you're happy with it, well, that's fine. Yeah. But maybe you need to think in different frames and think in different ways. Yeah? And I'd just like to finish with a little story, what this is really all about, because these were my ideas, some of my ideas. Your strength and your creativity will be your ideas in working with your learners. And this is my kind of message, if you like. It's just a kind of final thought. A woman dreamed she walked into a brand new shop in the marketplace. "What do you sell here?" she asked. "Everything your heart desires," was the reply. Hardly daring to believe what she was hearing, the woman decided to ask the best things a human being could wish for. "I want peace of mind and love and happiness and wisdom and freedom from fear," she said. Then as an afterthought she added, "Not just for me, for everyone on earth."
Wow.
Yeah, wonderful, isn't it? The salesperson smiled. "I think you've got me wrong, my dear. We don't sell fruits here, only seeds." Okay, there's a little time for a few questions. Yeah. I think you might need a microphone.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much for the wonderful session. I have actually two questions.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you your panel discussion also, which I couldn't. I'm taking this occasion to ask you this question. First of all, we are talking of inclusive classrooms, right? Now, inclusive classrooms means we have with the normal children with disabilities also, right? The actual problems starts right from the materials. Normally we have classrooms where one textbook is prescribed for the whole class and across the classrooms. Now, at the time of materials production, I must say that we do not give a thought to these special children. What comes is as an afterthought. We include what is needed by them, and then we try to evolve methodology to teach them using the same textbook. We do not have, our teachers do not have freedom to create materials like this. All that they have is one textbook and they have to make do with it. Now, how do we overcome this? This is my first question. Second question is, again, inclusive classrooms. These days, what about a heterogeneous class with learners with multiple, different learners who have different disabilities or different special children? We have visually challenged children and hearing impaired children. In a previous session, in this very hall, we attended a session which was for people with hearing impairment, and we had a couple of people who were visually challenged in the same room. So all those things which were projected could not be, we could not address those children. So this is a challenge to the teacher in an inclusive classroom. It's very good to talk about inclusive classrooms. What are the practical problems in this? Could you please give your thoughts to us? Thank you.
I hope the message we gave in the panel discussion from both men, was that there are no simple answers. So there's no, that's the answer. But obviously there are solutions. All I can say is what I think on this subject. And there's so many things in what you're saying. Just on the concept of inclusion, I think obviously we're all for inclusion. But it depends what you mean by inclusion. For me, inclusion is about choice, actually. And it's not always, inclusion doesn't necessarily mean all learners are in the same class all the time. What it is about inclusion of learning, inclusion of possibility and opportunity. Now, in the UK, in the main, it's about all-inclusive classroom, and it has its challenges and it has its successes, and in principle, I think it's a very good idea. But I think it is about parental and individual choice as well. And as I mentioned, I visited a couple of special schools in Mumbai, and they're doing fantastic work. And most of the young people who are there, it's right that they are there as well. I think it's their democratic right in those contexts. So I think the principle is about how can we support people to achieve, and then it's a question of what's the right structure. So I don't actually take the view that all in their own classroom 100% all the time, you know, because I think this needs to be considered. I can't talk for what happens in India. I can only talk for me. Yeah. But I think we need to think about this. Yeah. What's the first part of the question again? Yeah. Oh yes, materials. Yeah. Well, all I can say is absolutely yes. I mean, it has to be there at the very beginning of this thought. You know, and kind of how do we ensure as much access as practically possible? You know, it's not everything can be done 100% perfect. It's doing the best we can in the best way we can. But absolutely, what we said on Saturday about the need to embed training for teachers, the same applies for actually materials. Just on your other point about how would you include everyone? Well, you could do aspects of the music and the drawing for different people. You know, so you're still actually doing, even if you're not doing every single bit in the same way, you might do part of the task in different ways, and they could, and somebody who's got some visual challenges might do something which is much more auditory with that task. You know, so it's still possible for everyone to do the task, and what fundamentally matters is not the trick and the game, and what matters is what do you want them to achieve in the lesson, in the course. So the focus is on the learning outcomes, not on the magic solution, of an idea. Yes, is that? Yeah.
The first question that I wanted to ask you, this is particularly with relation to dyslexia. Would you say that all of them have a visual sequencing error or deficit? Would that be your perspective to this?
Well, there's somebody sitting next to you who probably answer this better than I can, but probably knows more about it. But from what I know, and I say I'm not coming to this as an expert in any of these areas. Yeah. I've done training on this. I work with people who are much more of an expert than I am, and I'm kind of saying a lot of the things that they are telling me. And I think, and as far as I know, kind of sequencing is one of the major challenges. Yeah.
One of them could be sequencing, but there are children who do not have sequencing errors, but are largely logical memory deficits of logical deficits. That was one part of the question. Yeah. The other is the activities that you've shown us. How does it help a dyslexic child whose oral language is absolutely fine, intelligence levels are absolutely fine, the difficulty is with reading and spelling? Yes. How would these activities help the child at that point? My experience is all I can go on. It's that what I'm trying to do here, and I can't do everything, but what I'm trying to do here is bend the stick to a more holistic visual processing approach. That I know that many of these learners will. That is the way they actually perceive language, much better than kind of text work. Yeah? I mean, there's all sorts of other things that have to be done, you know, in terms of other strategies to work on that as well. Yeah.
Actually, I want to share that there is an institution in Delhi, National Institute of Personality and Child-Care Development, that conducts 1 year, 2 year and PG programs, and that is very useful. I want to share it.
Okay, thank you. And we will have to stop there, but thank you very much.
Just before you all go, there is a publication here which contains a lot of material relevant to what Phil is discussed. So do come and take. They're all here and available.